She satisfied herself with the thought that she'd seen the worst Seoul could offer: the loneliness, the prejudice, the quiet cruelty of a city that never quite let her belong. She was wrong. Because on the night 6 men in tailored suits informed Naomi Carter that her dead father's gambling debt now belonged to her, and that the only currency they'd accept was her body, the real nightmare hadn't even started yet. It walked through the door 5 minutes later, wearing a black coat and a face carved from winter. And it offered her something far worse than captivity. It offered her a ring. If this story reaches you, follow it all the way to the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The rain started around 9. Not the polite kind of rain that tapped against windows and reminded people to carry umbrellas. This was the angry kind. The kind that hammered Seoul's concrete like it had a personal grudge, flooding the gutters along Gangnam Daero and turning every side street into a shallow river. The kind that made taxi drivers curse and pedestrians sprint for cover beneath the glowing awnings of luxury boutiques that stayed open past midnight for the kind of clientele that never worried about weather. Naomi Carter worried about everything. She sat in the back of a black sedan that smelled like leather and someone else's cologne, watching raindrops race each other down the tinted window while the driver, a man she'd never seen before tonight, navigated through streets she didn't recognize. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Tired eyes, lips pressed tight, fingers gripping the hem of her skirt hard enough to wrinkle the fabric. The phone call had come 2 hours ago. A voice she didn't recognize, polite, almost gentle, telling her that her presence was requested at a private meeting regarding her late father's outstanding financial obligations, that a car would arrive at 8. That attendance was not optional. She should have called the police. She should have locked her door and turned off the lights and pretended she didn't exist. But the voice on the phone knew her address, knew the name of her gallery, knew that she lived alone on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse in Itaewon with no security system and a front door lock she'd been meaning to replace for 6 months. So she got in the car, because that's what people did when they had no good options. They picked the least bad one and prayed. The sedan pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a building with no visible signage. The driver opened her door without making eye contact and gestured toward a service elevator at the far end of the concrete floor. Naomi's heels echoed in the empty space as she walked. Each step felt like a countdown. The elevator was mirrored on 3 sides. She caught herself adjusting her hair, a reflex so deeply programmed that even fear couldn't override it, and then felt disgusted by the vanity. Nobody up there cared what she looked like. They cared about numbers, about debt, about whatever her father had left behind like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Marcus Carter had been dead for 47 days. Heart attack. Alone in a rented room in Busan that smelled like cigarettes and regret. The landlord found him 2 days later when the smell got worse. Naomi had flown down to identify the body and handle the cremation and sort through the wreckage of a life she'd spent a decade trying to forget. Her father had been a lot of things. A dreamer, a liar, a man who could charm the paint off walls and the money out of wallets. He'd brought her to Seoul when she was 15, chasing some business opportunity that evaporated within 6 months, and then proceeded to spend the next 20 years failing upward through a series of schemes, scams, and spectacularly bad investments. He borrowed from everyone: friends, strangers, banks that should have known better, and when the legitimate sources dried up, he found illegitimate ones. Naomi had cut him off at 20, stopped answering his calls at 22, built her entire adult life on the principle that she would never become him, never depend on anyone else's money, never make promises she couldn't keep, never let charm substitute for substance. She opened her gallery at 25 with savings she'd scraped together from 3 different jobs: contemporary art, mixed media, work that most people in Seoul's art world dismissed as too aggressive, too Western, too much. She didn't care. The gallery was hers. Every brushstroke on every wall belonged to a life she'd built with her own hands. And now her dead father was reaching up from the grave to take it all away. The elevator opened onto a hallway that looked like it belonged inside a 5-star hotel. Dark wood paneling, recessed lighting, thick carpet that swallowed sound. A man in a gray suit stood at the end. Young, clean-shaven, eyes that assessed her the way a butcher assessed meat. "Miss Carter," he said. Not a question. This way. The room beyond was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-soaked sprawl of Gangnam's skyline. A marble table long enough to seat 12. Crystal tumblers filled with amber liquid. The air thick with whiskey and cigar smoke and something else. Something that smelled like money and menace, braided together so tightly you couldn't separate them. 6 men sat around the table. 5 of them were variations on a theme. Expensive suits, hard faces, the relaxed posture of men accustomed to controlling rooms. They ranged in age from late 30s to early 60s. Not one of them stood when she entered. The 6th man sat at the head of the table. Jae-un-seo. She knew the name because her father had whispered it once during their last phone call, the one she almost didn't answer. He'd sounded drunk and scared, which was unusual because Marcus Carter was never scared. Reckless, stupid, delusional, sure, but never scared. "There's a man named Seo," he'd slurred. "If anything happens to me, Naomi, if anything happens, don't talk to him, don't meet with him, just run." She hadn't run. Jae-hoon Seo looked like someone's kind uncle. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair combed neatly to one side. Reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. Soft hands folded over a leather portfolio. He smiled when Naomi walked in, and the smile was warm and genuine and absolutely terrifying because it belonged to a man who had no reason to be warm or genuine. "Miss Carter." His voice was quiet, measured, the voice of a man who never needed to raise it. "Thank you for coming. I understand this must be confusing. Please sit down." She sat, not because she wanted to, but because her legs had stopped cooperating with the part of her brain screaming at her to turn around and leave. "Would you like something to drink?" Seo asked. "No." "Water? Tea? I'd like to know what this is about." Seo nodded slowly, as if he appreciated directness. He opened the leather portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper across the marble table. Naomi didn't touch it. "Your father," Seo began, "was a valued client of ours for many years. We provided him with capital when traditional institutions would not. In return, he agreed to certain repayment terms." A pause. "He did not meet those terms. I don't have anything to do with my father's business. Unfortunately, Miss Carter, Korean inheritance law disagrees." The words landed like a slap. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. She'd heard something about this, that debts could transfer to family members, that there were legal mechanisms she didn't fully understand because she'd spent her entire adult life avoiding every piece of paper with her father's name on it. "The outstanding balance," Seo continued, sliding a second document across the table, "is 200 million won." The number didn't register at first. It sat in the air like something abstract, like a figure from a news article about someone else's disaster. Then her brain caught up with her ears and the room tilted slightly, and she gripped the edge of the marble table because the floor suddenly felt unreliable. 200 million won, roughly $150,000. She didn't have it. She didn't have anything close to it. The gallery broke even most months. Her savings account held enough for 3 months of rent and 1 dental emergency. She owned nothing of value except the art on her walls, and most of that was her own work, which the market had decided was worth approximately nothing. "I can't pay that," she said. Her voice sounded strange, thin, like someone had turned the volume down. "We know," Seo said gently. "We've taken the liberty of reviewing your financial situation." He reached into the portfolio again, and this time pulled out a thick envelope. He upended it onto the table, and photographs spilled across the marble like a hand of cards dealt by the devil himself. Naomi stared. The photographs were of her, walking to her gallery in the morning, locking up at night, buying coffee from the vendor on the corner of her street, sitting alone in her apartment with the curtains open, sleeping. They had photographed her sleeping. The realization hit her like ice water. Not the fear itself, but the understanding of what the fear meant. These men had been watching her, not for days, not for weeks, for months. They knew her schedule, they knew her habits, they knew the exact window of her apartment that she forgot to close when the nights got warm. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered. Seo leaned back in his chair. The warm uncle expression flickered, and for just a moment, something reptilian moved behind his eyes. "Because I want you to understand," he said, "that we are thorough people, Miss Carter. We don't enjoy unresolved accounts. and we always find a way to close them. One of the other men, younger, harder, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, spoke for the first time. "There's an alternative arrangement." Naomi looked at him. He smiled the way a snake smiled before swallowing something whole. "Mr. Seo operates several establishments in Gangnam. Private membership, very exclusive clientele, politicians, CEOs, foreign diplomats." He paused, letting each word sink through her skin. "The women who work at these establishments are compensated extremely well. 2 years of service would clear your father's debt completely." The room went quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against your eardrums and made you hear your own heartbeat, like a drum being struck from inside your chest. Naomi understood what they were offering. She understood it the way you understand a car accident in the split second before impact, with perfect, horrifying clarity. "No?" she said. The word came out harder than she expected, sharper. It surprised even her. "No?" Seo repeated, as if the word was quaint. "No. I'll find another way. I'll get a lawyer. I'll file for bankruptcy. I don't care what Korean inheritance law says. I am not my father, and I am not property you can reassign." Something shifted in the room. The men around the table exchanged glances. The young one with the scar laughed, a short, ugly sound that bounced off the marble. "Miss Carter," Seo said, and the warmth was completely gone now, replaced by something flat and patient and infinitely more dangerous. "You seem to be operating under the impression that this is a negotiation." He reached across the table and tapped the photographs with one manicured finger. "We know where you live. We know you have no family, no boyfriend, no emergency contacts listed on any form you've ever filled out. We know your gallery lease expires in 4 months, and you don't have the revenue to renew it." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You are alone in this city, Miss Carter. And in this city, women who are alone and in debt to the wrong people tend to disappear very quietly." The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was surgical, precise, and clean, and designed to cut through every layer of defiance she had left. Naomi's hands trembled beneath the table. She could feel her pulse in her throat, hammering against the skin like something trying to escape. The fight-or-flight response that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The door behind her was closed. The hallway beyond it led to an elevator she couldn't operate without their permission, and the streets below were empty in the rain. She was trapped, and every man in this room knew it. Seo opened his mouth to continue, but the sound that came next wasn't his voice. It was a door opening. Not the door Naomi had entered through. A different one. A private entrance behind the head of the table that she hadn't noticed because it was designed to be invisible, flush with the wood paneling, without a visible handle. The reaction in the room was immediate and absolute. Every man at the table stood up. Not casually, not politely. They stood the way soldiers stood when a commanding officer entered. Fast, rigid, with spines suddenly straight and eyes suddenly lowered. Jae-hoon Seo's face went the color of old paper. The young man with the scar looked like someone had yanked his confidence out through his throat. Naomi turned in her chair. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, late 20s or early 30s, black coat over a charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone in a way that looked deliberate. His features were sharp, high cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, dark eyes that swept the room the way a searchlight swept a prison yard. Everything about him was controlled. His posture, his breathing, the way his hands hung at his sides, completely still, as if violence was something he carried so naturally it didn't require preparation. He looked at the room the way winter looks at grass. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. The rain hammered against the windows, and it was the only sound left in the world. Then Jae-hoon Seo bowed. Not a casual bow, not the polite head tilt that people performed in hallways and elevators. This was deep, submissive. The bow of a man confronted by something that outranked him so completely that pride became irrelevant. "Mr. Kang," Seo said. His voice had changed entirely. The quiet authority was gone. What remained was something smaller. "We weren't expecting. This is an informal matter, a private debt resolution, nothing that requires your attention." The man in the doorway didn't respond. He walked into the room with the kind of silence that expensive shoes and absolute confidence produced when combined. His eyes moved from Seo to the photographs on the table, to the documents, to the crystal tumblers, to the faces of the 5 other men who suddenly looked like they wanted to dissolve into the wallpaper. Then his gaze landed on Naomi. It stayed. Something passed through his expression. Not surprise, not recognition, but something deeper and stranger, like a man seeing a painting he'd been thinking about for years suddenly appear on a wall he didn't expect to find it. "Everyone out," he said. 2 words, spoken at normal volume. No anger, no threat, no emphasis. Just a statement of reality delivered by a voice accustomed to having reality rearrange itself on command. The 5 men moved for the door immediately. They didn't look at Naomi. They didn't look at each other. They walked with the focused purpose of people evacuating a building they expected to collapse. Seo hesitated. "Mr. Kang, if I might explain, you have 3 seconds to be somewhere else." Seo left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a lock engaging. And then it was just the 2 of them. Naomi Carter, sitting at a marble table surrounded by photographs of her own life, hands still trembling, pulse still hammering, her entire body vibrating with a fear that had nowhere to go because the threat had left, but something worse had replaced it. And the man they called Mr. Kang. He pulled out the chair across from her, the one Seo had occupied, and sat down. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. He unbuttoned his coat. He placed his hands on the table, fingers laced, and looked at her with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. The silence stretched. Naomi broke it first because waiting felt worse than speaking. "Who are you?" "My name is Elias Kang." "That doesn't answer my question." The faintest flicker of something, amusement, respect, crossed his features. "My family owns this building, and the one next to it, and the bank that finances Seo's operations, and the port authority that looks the other way when his shipments arrive." He paused. "I'm the reason those men were afraid." "Should I be afraid?" Probably. The honesty was disarming. She'd expected denial, deflection, the kind of smooth reassurance that powerful men used to make women lower their guard. Instead, he sat there and told her the truth like it was simply information she deserved to have. "The debt your father owed," Elias said. 200 million won. "I know the number. It's meaningless. It's not meaningless to me. I mean, the number is meaningless to Seo. He could write it off tomorrow and never notice the loss. He's not after your money, Miss Carter. He's after you." The words landed with a sickening weight. Naomi had suspected it, had felt the shape of it in the photographs, in the way Seo's men looked at her, in the obscene neatness of the alternative arrangement. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that closed around her chest like a fist. "Men like Seo collect people," Elias continued, "especially women. Especially women who are isolated and foreign and beautiful and desperate. You check every box." "So what? You came here to warn me? Is this some kind of public service announcement from the Kang family?" "No." Elias leaned back slightly. "I came here to make you an offer." Naomi laughed. It came out broken, raw, a sound that had more anger in it than humor. "Another offer. That's perfect. That's just absolutely perfect. The last offer involved me selling my body for 2 years. What's yours?" "My soul." "A kidney? My firstborn child?" Elias didn't flinch. "Marriage," he said. The word detonated in the space between them. Naomi stared at him. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Marry me," Elias repeated, as if the first time hadn't been absurd enough. "Become Mrs. Kang. The debt disappears tonight. Seo never contacts you again. Nobody touches you, threatens you, or photographs you while you sleep. You get full financial security and the protection of the most powerful family in Seoul. In return, you attend public events as my wife, maintain appearances for 2 years, and convince the people around us that the marriage is real." "You're insane. I'm practical. You don't know me." Something shifted in his eyes. A shadow. A weight. The briefest crack in the controlled facade, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. "I know more about you than you think," he said quietly. The statement hung in the air between them like smoke. Naomi felt something cold slide down her spine. Not fear exactly, but the awareness of being known by someone she'd never met. The same feeling the photographs had given her, but different, more personal, more invasive. What does that mean? Elias didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and produced a document, thick, professionally bound, dense with legal text. He placed it on the table between them. The contract, he said. Read it. Every word. No forced intimacy. No control over your body, your finances, or your personal decisions. Separate bedrooms. Full access to the estate. A monthly allowance you can spend however you choose. At the end of 2 years, the marriage dissolves. You keep everything you've earned, and you walk away with no strings attached. Naomi looked at the document, then at him. Why? She asked. Why me? You could marry anyone. You could snap your fingers and have a line of women from here to Busan waiting to become Mrs. Kong. Why would you choose a broke art dealer with a dead father and a mountain of debt? Elias held her gaze. The room was so quiet she could hear the rain on the windows, and the blood in her own ears and the steady, controlled rhythm of his breathing. Because I need someone real, he said. Someone who can't be bought and doesn't want to be. Someone the world around me would never expect. He paused. And because 2 years from now, I need a wife who can walk away without looking back. Women who want to be Mrs. Kang are exactly the kind of women I can't afford to marry. It made a terrible kind of sense. The logic was clean, cold, transactional. The same business thinking that probably built his family's empire. He wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for an actress. And she was the only one desperate enough to audition. I need to think about it, she said. You have until midnight tomorrow. That's 24 hours. 23, actually. He glanced at his watch. The offer expires after that. Not because I'm pressuring you, because Seo will find another way to reach you within 48 hours, and once he does, my involvement becomes significantly more complicated. He stood, buttoned his coat, produced a business card from his pocket and placed it on top of the contract. Call me when you decide. He walked toward the private door. Naomi watched him go, her mind spinning through calculations that had nothing to do with math and everything to do with survival. Elias. He stopped, turned. If I say yes, she said, and her voice was steadier than she felt, you understand that I'm not yours. I'm not property. I don't belong to you just because you paid for me. Something moved through his expression, something that looked almost like pain. I'm not paying for you, Naomi, he said. I'm offering you a door. What you do after you walk through it is entirely up to you. He left. Naomi sat alone at the marble table for 17 minutes. She knew because she counted. 17 minutes of staring at the contract and the business card and the photographs of her own life spread across cold stone while rain hammered against windows and the city sprawled below her like an ocean of light and noise and indifference. She picked up the contract and began to read. She called him at 11:42 the next night. The wedding was held 4 days later at Seoul City Hall in a fluorescent-lit room that smelled like floor cleaner and bureaucracy. Naomi wore a gray dress she'd bought at a department store that morning. Elias wore a dark suit. 2 witnesses, Kang family employees, stood by the door with the blank expressions of people trained to see nothing. There were no vows, no rings, no flowers, no kiss. Just signatures on government forms that legally chained Naomi Carter to Elias Kang, while a clerk stamped documents with the mechanical rhythm of someone who processed 20 of these a day and never thought about what they meant. When it was over, Elias looked at her. Ready? He asked. For what? Your new life. The car that took them from City Hall was not the same sedan that had brought Naomi to the meeting with Seo. This one was armored. She could tell by the way the doors closed. Heavy, thick, the dull thud of steel meeting steel. The driver wore an earpiece. A second vehicle followed behind them. They drove north through the city, past the neon chaos of Gangnam, past the quieter residential blocks of Hanam-dong, through a checkpoint that required the driver to lower his window and present identification to armed men who scanned the car with flashlights before waving them through. And then the road narrowed and the trees thickened and the city fell away and Naomi realized they were climbing, ascending a hill that shouldn't exist in the middle of Seoul, rising above the skyline like a private mountain hidden in plain sight. The Kang compound appeared through the trees like something from another century. It was massive. Ancient Korean architecture, dark wood, curved roof lines, stone walls that had weathered centuries of weather, merged with modern glass and steel in a way that felt less like a home and more like a statement. Guard towers at each corner, security cameras hidden in landscaping so precisely maintained it looked painted. A main gate that opened automatically as the car approached, revealing a courtyard large enough to park a dozen vehicles. Naomi stepped out of the car and the air hit her differently up here. Cooler. Thinner. Like the atmosphere itself had been curated. Servants lined the path from the courtyard to the main entrance. Men and women in dark uniforms, heads bowed, hands folded. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked at her directly. They simply existed, silent, watchful, ready to serve needs she hadn't expressed yet. "This is where you live?" Naomi said. "This is where we live," Elias corrected. The main house was 3 stories of controlled opulence, Korean antiques beside modern art, hand-carved furniture next to pieces that looked like they'd been pulled from a Milan showroom, everything immaculate, everything deliberate, everything designed to communicate a single message. The people who live here are not like you. Elias showed her through the residence with the efficiency of a real estate agent rather than a new husband. This is the kitchen. This is the east wing. This is the garden. These stairs lead to the second floor, where their bedrooms were, separate, as promised, on opposite ends of a hallway lined with paintings that probably cost more than Naomi's entire gallery. Her room was beautiful, large windows overlooking a traditional Korean garden, a bed that could sleep 4, a private bathroom with a soaking tub and heated floors, fresh flowers on the nightstand, because someone had apparently anticipated her arrival with enough lead time to arrange peonies. She set down the single suitcase she'd brought and stood in the middle of the room and breathed. "Dinner is at 8, Elias said from the doorway. "My mother will be there." "Your mother?" "Victoria Kang." Something in the way he said the name, careful, measured, the way you'd say the name of a venomous animal, made Naomi's stomach tighten. "Should I be worried?" Elias paused. His hand rested on the doorframe, and he seemed to weigh his answer the way a man weighs a loaded weapon. "She's going to test you," he said finally. "She tests everyone. Don't take it personally." "What kind of test?" "The kind where she finds the weakest part of you and pushes until something breaks." He met her eyes. "Don't break." He left her alone with the peonies and the silence and the growing certainty that she had traded one cage for another. Dinner was held in a formal dining room on the ground floor, a long table made from a single slab of dark walnut, set with porcelain and crystal and silverware that caught the light from a chandelier that probably predated the Korean War. 3 places were set, one at each end of the table and one in the middle. Naomi took the middle seat because it was the only one left when she arrived. Victoria Kang was already seated at the far end. Victoria was 62 years old and looked 45. Perfect posture. Perfect hair, swept up in a style that Naomi recognized from old photographs of East Asian socialites from the 1960s, a silk blouse the color of midnight, pearl earrings that were either inherited or cost more than most people's annual salary. Her face was beautiful in the way that certain sculptures were beautiful, precise, symmetrical, and entirely without warmth. She looked at Naomi the way a jeweler looks at a stone they suspect is fake. "So," Victoria said, "you're the one. Mrs. Kang, it's nice to meet you." "Is it?" Victoria picked up her wine glass, sipped, set it down with the deliberation of someone timing every gesture. "My son informs me that you were married 4 days ago, that I was not invited to the ceremony, that I learned about the union from a text message sent by his assistant." Her eyes found Naomi's. "Tell me, Miss Carter, in your culture, is it customary to exclude the groom's mother from the wedding?" The attack was immediate. Not a warm-up, not small talk. Victoria Kang went straight for the throat with the precision of someone who had been doing this her entire life. "The ceremony was small," Naomi said. "By design." "By design," Victoria repeated, as if the phrase amused her. "How modern, how practical." She looked toward the doorway where Elias would eventually appear. "My son has always been practical. It's his best quality and his worst." Her gaze returned to Naomi. "Tell me about your father." The shift was so fast it felt like whiplash. "My father passed away recently." "Yes." Marcus Carter, American-born, chronic debtor, known associate of several unlicensed lending operations in the Busan metropolitan area. Victoria listed the facts the way someone would read a grocery list, without emotion, without judgment, Just information she'd gathered because gathering information was what she did. He died owing significant money to Jae-hoon Seo, among others. And now here you are. Here I am, in my home, at my table, wearing my son's name. Victoria set down her glass. So let me ask you directly, Miss Carter, because I believe in directness, and I suspect you do too. Did you engineer this marriage to escape your father's debt? Did you use a dead man's mistakes to attach yourself to the most powerful family in Seoul? The accusation didn't come wrapped in pleasantries. It was raw, naked, delivered with the confidence of a woman who believed that politeness was a weapon used by people who didn't have better ones. Naomi felt the blood rise in her face. Anger and humiliation fought for control of her expression, and she let neither one win because she could feel Victoria watching for exactly that, watching for the crack, the flinch, the moment of weakness that would confirm every assumption she'd already made. Your son approached me, Naomi said, not the other way around. Yes, my son has a habit of collecting strays. The word landed like a slap. Stray, not person, not woman, not even guest. Stray. An animal found in the street, brought inside out of pity, tolerated but never truly welcomed. Naomi opened her mouth to respond, but Elias appeared in the doorway. He read the room in a single glance. The tension, the positioning, his mother's lifted chin and Naomi's rigid posture, and the careful distance between them that was measured not in feet, but in hostility. Mother, he said, and his voice carried something Naomi hadn't heard before, a warning wrapped in silk. Naomi is my wife. She is a guest in this house, and she will be treated accordingly. Victoria looked at her son. Something passed between them, a silent conversation conducted in the language of people who had been at war with each other for decades. Then Victoria smiled, small, controlled, the smile of a woman who had lost a battle but not the war. Of course, darling, she said. I was simply welcoming her to the family. Dinner proceeded in a silence thick enough to chew. Naomi ate without tasting. Elias sat at the far end of the table and watched his mother with the quiet vigilance of a man guarding a border. Victoria ate with perfect manners and spoke only to comment on the food and the weather and the traffic in Gangnam, as if the previous 5 minutes hadn't happened. Afterward, when the plates were cleared and Victoria excused herself with a bow that was respectful in form and contemptuous in substance, Elias found Naomi in the garden. She was standing beside a koi pond, staring into dark water illuminated by stone lanterns that cast amber light across the surface. The fish moved beneath the glow, like living brushstrokes, slow, deliberate, unbothered by the world above them. Are you all right? Elias asked. Your mother called me a stray. She calls everyone a stray, including me. That doesn't make it better. He stood beside her, not close enough to touch. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence in the cool night air. I should tell you something, he said. Naomi looked at him. The lantern light carved shadows across his face, softening the sharp edges, making him look younger and more uncertain than the man who had walked into that room 3 days ago and made 6 criminals bow. I didn't find you by accident, Elias said. I didn't stumble onto Seo's meeting or arrive at the perfect moment because I happened to be in the building. He paused. His jaw worked as if the words were stuck somewhere in his chest, and he had to physically push them out. I've known who you are for a long time, Naomi. 10 years. The world tilted. 10 years, she repeated. There was an exhibition, underground, a converted warehouse in Mapogu. You were 22. You had 3 pieces in the show. Mixed media, abstract, angry work that didn't match anything else on the walls. His voice dropped. One of them was a self-portrait. You painted yourself standing in an empty room with your back to the viewer, and the room was on fire, and you weren't running. Naomi remembered the painting. She remembered every painting she'd ever made because they were the only honest things she'd ever produced. That one had been about loneliness, about the particular kind of isolation that comes from being foreign in a country that will never fully accept you, no matter how perfectly you learn the language or how deeply you immerse yourself in the culture. She'd painted it during a week when she hadn't spoken to another human being for 6 days straight, and the silence had started to feel like fire, consuming her slowly from the edges. You were there? She whispered. I was there because one of my family's companies was funding the exhibition. I didn't care about the art. I went because it was expected." He turned to face her, and his expression was raw in a way that didn't match anything she knew about the man who controlled empires and made criminals kneel. "But I saw you standing next to that painting, and you were looking at it like you wanted to climb inside it and disappear, and I couldn't stop looking at you." The confession fell between them like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples. Disturbance. The disruption of a surface that had been carefully maintained. "Why didn't you talk to me?" Naomi asked. "Because I was 23 years old and I was the heir to a criminal empire, and you were a woman who painted about loneliness, and I didn't know how to be in the same room as something that honest without wanting to destroy it or protect it, and I wasn't sure which impulse was worse." The raw honesty of the answer stunned her. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't a performance designed to manipulate or charm. This was a man ripping open something he'd kept sealed for a decade and letting the contents spill out onto the garden stones between them. "So you watched me instead," Naomi said. "For 10 years. I kept track of you. Your gallery openings, your exhibitions, the article in that art magazine 2 years ago. I knew when your father died. I knew about the debt before Seoul contacted you." He looked away. "I should have intervened sooner." "You should have intervened never. You should have walked up to me at that exhibition like a normal person and said, 'Hello.'" "I'm not a normal person." "No kidding." They stood in silence for a moment. The koi circled beneath the water. The lanterns flickered. Somewhere inside the house, a door closed. "This doesn't change the contract," Naomi said finally. "Whatever you felt or didn't feel 10 years ago, this marriage is still an arrangement. 2 years. Public appearances. Then I walk away." Elias nodded slowly. "Understood. And I don't want you watching me. No surveillance, no photographs, no checking up on me when I'm not here. I had enough of being watched by Seoul's people. I won't tolerate it from you." "Done. And I paint in the mornings, early, before the sun comes up. I need a space, not a closet or a corner. She's a real space, a light, ventilation, room to make a mess." The faintest trace of a smile touched his lips. "I'll have a studio built." "You don't need to build anything, just give me a room with windows." "I'll have a studio built," he repeated. Naomi looked at him, really looked, for the first time since the garden. The lantern light, the shadows, the way he held himself so carefully, as if relaxation was a luxury he'd never been able to afford. "Good night, Elias," she said. "Good night, Naomi." She turned and walked back toward the house. At the garden entrance, she paused, looked over her shoulder. He was still standing by the pond, still watching the water, still perfectly still. 10 years, she said. He didn't respond. She went inside, climbed the stairs, closed the door to her beautiful room with its peonies and its heated floors and its windows overlooking a kingdom she now technically belonged to. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands against her face and breathed. Somewhere below her, in a house full of shadows and silence and the weight of a name that made an entire city tremble, Elias Kang stood beside a koi pond and thought about a painting of a woman standing in a burning room. And he thought about the fact that after 10 years of watching from the edges of her life, he finally had her under his roof. And he thought about the one thing he hadn't told her, the one thing the contract didn't cover. The reason he'd chosen her wasn't just because she was real or brave or beautiful in the way that only damaged things can be beautiful. It wasn't just because she could walk away in 2 years without looking back. It was because he was terrified that in 2 years he wouldn't be able to let her go. And as rain hammered against the windows of the Kang estate, and the city of Seoul pulsed and breathed beneath them like a living thing, Naomi Carter fell asleep in a stranger's house wearing a stranger's name, unaware that the man she'd married was standing in the dark below her window. Not watching, just standing there. Because standing near her was the closest thing to peace he'd felt in 10 years, and he wasn't ready to let go of it yet. The studio appeared 3 days later. Not a room with windows. Not a converted closet or a cleared-out guest bedroom with a tarp on the floor. An actual studio. 200 square feet of north-facing glass built into the east wing of the compound, with concrete floors already stained by phantom paint, industrial ventilation that hummed like a living thing, and an easel made from reclaimed oak that probably cost more than Naomi's entire inventory of supplies back at her apartment. She stood in the doorway at 5 in the morning with her hair pulled back and her old painting shirt. A men's flannel she'd stolen from a thrift store 6 years ago, so covered in dried acrylics it was practically a canvas itself, hanging loose around her shoulders. The room smelled like fresh construction and linseed oil. Tubes of paint were arranged on a workbench along the far wall. Not cheap student-grade acrylics. Professional oils. Every color. Every brand. The kind of paint she'd stared at through shop windows for years without buying because a single tube cost more than 2 days of groceries. She didn't touch any of it. She stood there for 11 minutes, counting the seconds the way she'd counted them at the marble table the night her life changed, and then she turned around and went back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, and felt something she couldn't name crawl through her chest like a fist tightening around something soft. It wasn't gratitude. Gratitude was warm and simple and clean. This was complicated. This was the feeling of being known by someone who had no right to know her, of having desires anticipated before she'd spoken them, needs met before she'd acknowledged them, spaces created for parts of herself she hadn't shared with anyone. It was intimacy without permission, and it terrified her more than the debt ever had. She avoided the studio for 4 days, painted nothing, ate breakfast alone in her room because the formal dining table felt like a battlefield, and she wasn't ready for another round with Victoria. She explored the compound instead, wandering through corridors that smelled like aged wood and fresh flowers, past rooms she hadn't been shown during the tour, through gardens so precisely maintained they looked artificial. The compound was enormous, larger than she'd initially understood. Multiple buildings connected by covered walkways and stone paths. A traditional Korean tea house tucked behind a grove of pine trees. A gymnasium with equipment that looked military grade. An indoor swimming pool beneath a glass ceiling that turned the water into liquid light when the sun hit it. And everywhere, in every hallway, at every gate, behind every carefully trimmed hedge, men with earpieces and expressionless faces who tracked her movements without ever acknowledging her existence. She was the wife of Elias Kang, and she had never felt more like a prisoner. On the 5th morning, Naomi found Victoria in the main house library. She hadn't planned on it. She'd been looking for a different room, a sitting area she'd glimpsed through a half-open door during her explorations, and instead walked straight into a space-lined floor-to-ceiling with books, and found Elias's mother seated in a leather armchair with a cup of tea and a newspaper folded open to the society pages. Victoria looked up. Her expression didn't change. She simply took in Naomi's presence the way she took in everything, with the calm, calculating assessment of someone who had been evaluating threats for decades. "You're up early," Victoria said. "I'm always up early." "Painters." Victoria said the word like a diagnosis. "My husband used to wake early as well, though his reasons were less artistic." Naomi didn't know what to do with the mention of Elias's father. She knew almost nothing about him, only that he was dead, that his name carried enough weight to silence rooms, and that nobody in the compound ever spoke about him directly. "I was looking for the east sitting room," Naomi said. "Down the hall, second door on the left." Victoria turned a page of the newspaper. "Though I imagine you already knew that. You've been mapping the house for days. I've been watching you on the security monitors." The admission was delivered casually. No apology, no shame, just a statement of fact from a woman who saw surveillance as a natural extension of hospitality. "I wasn't mapping anything. I was walking. In my experience, people who walk without destination are either thinking or running." Victoria looked up. "Which one are you doing?" "Maybe both." Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Not warmth. Warmth was probably not a setting available on her emotional thermostat, but something adjacent. Recognition. The acknowledgement of a worthy adversary. "Sit down," Victoria said. Naomi sat. Not because she was told to, because her legs were tired of wandering through hallways that all looked the same and conversations that all felt like traps. Victoria poured tea from a ceramic pot into a second cup that had apparently been set out before Naomi arrived, which meant Victoria had known she was coming, which meant the security monitors weren't just for watching, they were for strategizing. "My son tells me nothing," Victoria said. "He has not told me nothing since he was 14 years old. It's his preferred method of control. Silence as a weapon. You may have noticed." "I've noticed." "He built you a studio." "Yes." "He built it in 3 days, which means he gave the order before the wedding." Victoria sipped her tea. "Which means he planned this arrangement before you agreed to it." possibly before he proposed it. My son does not improvise, Miss Carter. He designs. He constructs outcomes the way architects construct buildings, from the foundation up, with every load-bearing wall calculated before the first brick is laid. Naomi felt the cold thing in her chest tighten again. The studio, the paint, the deliberateness of it all. "What are you telling me?" Naomi asked. "I'm telling you that whatever you think this marriage is, my son has a different definition. And his definition is the one that will prevail because his definitions always prevail." Victoria set down her cup. "I am not your enemy, Miss Carter. I'm the only person in this house who will tell you the truth without wrapping it in something you want to hear." "The truth about what?" "About what happens to the people Elias decides to protect." Victoria's voice dropped, and for the first time Naomi heard something beneath the steel, something old and tired and worn smooth by years of suppression. "He protects them completely, absolutely, with every resource at his disposal, and in doing so he consumes them, not out of cruelty, out of love. The Kang men love the way other men go to war, totally, destructively, without any concept of proportional response." The words settled over Naomi like snow, silent, cold, accumulating. "His father was the same?" Naomi asked. Victoria's jaw tightened. A micro-expression, there and gone. But Naomi was an artist, and artists saw things that other people missed because noticing was the only skill they'd ever truly mastered. "His father was worse," Victoria said. The conversation ended there. Victoria picked up her newspaper and resumed reading, as if Naomi had already left the room. The dismissal was elegant and absolute, and Naomi took it because pushing further felt like pushing against a wall that had been reinforced from the other side. She went back to her room. She sat on the bed. She thought about architects and foundations and load-bearing walls. Then she got up and walked to the studio and picked up a brush and began to paint for the first time in 47 days. She painted for 6 hours. She painted a room on fire. The first public appearance happened 10 days after the wedding. A charity gala at the Shilla Hotel, Seoul's most exclusive venue, a cathedral of marble and crystal where the city's wealthiest families gathered to pretend they cared about causes while actually caring about positioning. Elias informed her at breakfast with the casual tone of someone mentioning a schedule change. "Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, black tie. A stylist will come to the house at 4 to help you prepare." "I can dress myself." "The people at this event will photograph everything you wear and analyze every detail for implications about our relationship, our finances, and our political alliances. The stylist isn't about dressing you, she's about controlling the narrative." Naomi hated that he was right. She hated even more that she understood. The stylist arrived at 4. A woman named Min Ji, with sharp cheekbones and the focused intensity of a surgeon. She brought 6 garment bags, 3 jewelry cases, and an opinion about everything. The dress they settled on was midnight blue, structured, elegant, conservative enough for Korean high society, but cut with enough edge to signal that Naomi wasn't trying to blend in. Minji pinned her hair up, applied makeup that made her look simultaneously natural and untouchable, and produced a pair of diamond earrings that Naomi immediately recognized as absurdly expensive. "Those aren't mine," Naomi said. "They are now. Mr. Kang selected them personally." Of course he did. The drive to the Shilla was silent. Naomi sat in the armored sedan beside Elias and watched the city slide past and tried to prepare herself for what was coming without any clear sense of what that was. Elias sat beside her with the composed stillness of a man who had attended 1,000 of these events and found each one slightly less tolerable than the last. "Stay close to me," he said as the car pulled up to the hotel entrance. "Don't engage with anyone who approaches you first. Let them come to us. And if anyone asks about the wedding, keep it simple. Small ceremony, private. We wanted it intimate." "You mean we wanted it secret?" "Intimate sounds better." The hotel lobby was a wall of sound and light. Crystal chandeliers, string quartet, 300 people in evening wear circulating through rooms that smelled like expensive perfume and quiet desperation. Every face was a mask. Every handshake was a transaction. Naomi felt the stares before she saw them. Dozens of eyes tracking her from across the room. Curious, hostile, calculating. She was the unknown. The American. The woman who had appeared from nowhere and attached herself to the most powerful name in Seoul. Elias placed his hand on the small of her back as they entered. The touch was light, professional. exactly the kind of contact that a devoted husband would maintain at a public event. But Naomi felt it through the fabric of her dress like a brand, not because it was unwanted, but because it felt intentional in a way that went beyond performance. They circulated. Elias introduced her to faces she wouldn't remember and names she couldn't pronounce, and shook hands with men who smiled at him with the careful deference of subordinates pretending to be equals. Every interaction followed the same pattern: surprise at the marriage, congratulations delivered through clenched teeth, and a subtle once-over of Naomi that assessed her worth in the same way Seo had assessed her in that room above Gangnam. She held it together. She smiled. She nodded. She played the role because playing roles was what survival looked like when you had no better options. And then Scarlett Han arrived. Naomi didn't know the name yet. She only saw a woman walking toward them through the crowd with the deliberate, unhurried stride of someone who expected people to move out of her way. And people did. Tall, Korean, hair cut sharp at the jaw. A red dress that fit like it had been painted on by someone who understood that elegance and aggression were not mutually exclusive. The woman stopped 3 feet in front of them. Her eyes went to Elias first, a look loaded with history and heat and something bitter that had curdled into contempt. And then to Naomi. The assessment lasted 2 seconds. It contained a lifetime of judgment. "Elias," the woman said. Her voice was honey poured over glass. "I heard you got married. I had to see for myself." "Scarlett." Elias's voice didn't change, didn't warm, didn't cool. It remained at the same controlled temperature he maintained for everything, but Naomi felt his hand press slightly harder against her back. "This is Naomi, my wife." Scarlett looked at Naomi, smiled. The smile was beautiful and absolutely lethal. "Naomi," Scarlett repeated, as if tasting the name. "How exotic. Tell me, did Elias find you at one of his charity projects, or was it more of a rescue situation?" The insult was surgical, precise, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who understood that the most devastating attacks came wrapped in pleasantries. Naomi felt the heat rise in her face, felt the anger bloom in her chest, felt every eye in the immediate vicinity turn toward them because people in rooms like this could smell blood from 50 feet away. "Actually," Naomi said, and her voice was steady because she had spent her entire life learning to stay steady in rooms that didn't want her there. "We met through mutual interests, art, conversation, the usual things people bond over when they're not trying to buy each other." The counterpunch landed. Naomi saw it in the flicker of Scarlett's eyelids, the micro-tightening of her jaw. A direct hit. "How charming," Scarlett said, recovering immediately. Elias always did have a soft spot for projects. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a register that was clearly intended for Naomi alone. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts, sweetheart. This world eats women like you alive, and when it's done, it doesn't even bother spitting out the bones." She turned and walked away. The crowd absorbed her like water absorbing a dropped stone, ripples, then stillness, then nothing. Naomi stood there, her pulse hammered. Her hands trembled at her sides, hidden by the drape of her dress. She could feel the aftermath of the confrontation radiating through her body like the echo of an explosion, not the blast itself, but the shockwave that came after, the part that collapsed walls and shattered windows from the inside out. Elias leaned down, his lips close to her ear, close enough that anyone watching would see a husband whispering tenderness to his wife. "You handled that well," he murmured. "Who is she?" A pause, half a heartbeat too long. "Someone I used to know." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I'm giving you tonight." Naomi pulled away from him, slightly, just enough to create an inch of space between his hand and her back. She looked up at his face and searched for the crack, the tell, the human thing hiding beneath the mask. She found it in his eyes. Guilt. Faint, well hidden, buried under layers of control, but there, unmistakable. The guilt of a man who knew that the woman who just walked away had the power to hurt the woman standing beside him and who hadn't warned her. "We're going to talk about this," Naomi said quietly. "Later, at home. And you're going to tell me the truth." "Naomi, the truth, Elias, all of it, or this arrangement ends tonight." She turned and walked toward the bar because she needed a drink, and she needed distance, and she needed 30 seconds without someone looking at her like she was a problem to be solved or a piece to be moved across a board she hadn't agreed to play on. She ordered whiskey. Neat. The bartender poured without comment. Naomi lifted the glass and drank and tasted nothing because her mouth was full of adrenaline and fury and the bitter residual flavor of a word she couldn't get out of her head. Projects. Scarlett had called her a project. And the worst part, the part that dug into Naomi's ribs like a splinter she couldn't reach, was that she wasn't sure Scarlett was wrong. The studio built before the wedding, the paint selected before she'd asked, the earrings chosen personally, every detail anticipated, every need met before it was expressed. She was being designed, constructed, managed, just like Victoria had warned her. The Kang men loved the way other men go to war, totally, destructively, without any concept of proportional response. Naomi set down the glass. The whiskey burned behind her sternum. The gala swirled around her. Laughter, music, the clink of crystal, and all of it felt like noise, like static, like the sound a television makes when it's tuned to a dead channel. She looked across the room, found Elias. He was watching her. Not with the cold assessment of a man managing a public performance, not with the controlled blankness he wore like armor. He was watching her the way he must have watched her at that gallery 10 years ago, with something raw, something unguarded, something that looked terrifyingly like need. And Naomi realized, standing alone at a bar in the most exclusive hotel in Seoul, wearing diamonds she didn't own and a name she didn't earn, that this was the point of no return. Because she could feel it happening. The shift, the pull, the slow, treacherous gravity of a man who had waited a decade for her and who would wait a decade more if she asked him to. And the terrifying certainty that she didn't want him to wait. She wanted him to come closer. And that was the most dangerous thing she had ever wanted in her life. Because wanting Elias Kang meant wanting a man whose love came with an empire attached, whose protection came with walls and cameras, and men with earpieces who tracked your movements through hallways you hadn't chosen, whose tenderness was built on the same foundation as his violence, absolute, consuming, without the smallest recognition of limits. She could still walk away. The contract said 2 years. The door was still open. But as she looked at him across that room full of strangers and liars and beautiful, hollow people, Naomi felt the door closing. Not because Elias was closing it, because she was. And somewhere on the other side of the ballroom, moving through the crowd like a blade through silk, Scarlett Hahn pulled out her phone and made a call that would change everything. "It's me," she said. "I met the wife. She's nobody. But he looks at her the way he never looked at us." A pause, a voice on the other end. Scarlett smiled, cold, final. "Then we take her apart, piece by piece, starting with the gallery." The call came at 1:47 in the morning. Naomi was still awake. She'd been lying in the dark for 2 hours with the gala dress hanging on the back of the bathroom door like a shed skin and the diamond earrings sitting on the nightstand like evidence of a crime she hadn't committed. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Scarlett's smile and Elias's guilt, and the vast, glittering room full of people who looked at her like she was a stain on expensive fabric. Her phone buzzed against the nightstand. An unknown number. She answered because at 1:47 in the morning, unknown numbers meant emergencies, and emergencies were the only honest thing left in her life. "Miss Carter?" A man's voice. Tight, professional. "This is Officer Yoon from the Yongsan Fire Station. I'm calling about your property on Itaewon Row. There's been a fire." The word didn't register at first. Fire. Such a small word for something that could consume everything. "What do you mean a fire?" "Your gallery, Miss Carter. I need you to come down here." She was dressed and out the door in 4 minutes. She didn't wake Elias. She didn't tell anyone. She moved through the compound's corridors with the focused desperation of a woman running toward the only thing she'd ever built with her own hands, past the security station where a guard half rose from his chair and called after her, past the front gate where a driver was smoking beside one of the armored sedans. "Take me to Itaewon," she said. "Now." The driver looked at her, looked at the guard behind her, looked at his phone, presumably weighing whether to call someone for authorization. Naomi grabbed the passenger door handle. "Right now," she repeated. Her voice cracked on the second word. He drove. She saw the smoke before she saw the building. A thick column rising above the Itaewon skyline, lit orange from below, turning the low clouds into a ceiling of rust-colored light. 3 fire trucks blocked the street, hoses snaked across wet asphalt. Firefighters moved in and out of the smoke with the grim efficiency of men who'd seen this before and would see it again. Naomi got out of the car before it stopped moving. The gallery was destroyed. Not damaged, not scorched around the edges. Destroyed. The front windows had blown out from the heat and glass covered the sidewalk in a glittering carpet that crunched under her shoes as she stumbled toward the building. Smoke poured from the empty window frames like breath from a wounded animal. Inside, she could see the shapes of walls that had buckled and shelving that had collapsed, and the blackened remains of canvases that had once held months of work, years of meaning, entire chapters of a life that existed nowhere else. Her legs gave out. She went down on the wet sidewalk, knees hitting glass and concrete, and the pain that shot through her kneecaps was distant and irrelevant because every nerve in her body was focused on the thing burning in front of her. Her hands pressed against the ground. The asphalt was warm. Everything was warm. The air itself felt cooked, thick with smoke and the chemical stink of accelerant and something else. Something sweet and wrong that she'd later learn was the smell of varnish and linseed oil combusting at temperatures high enough to melt metal. A firefighter pulled her back, his hands on her shoulders, his voice saying words she couldn't process. "Ma'am, ma'am, you can't be here. Ma'am." "That's mine," she said. "That's my gallery. That's mine." He didn't let go. He steered her behind the truck line and sat her on the bumper of an ambulance, and someone put a blanket around her shoulders that she didn't need because the fire had made the entire street hot enough to sweat in. She sat there and watched her life burn. 40 minutes. That's how long it took for the firefighters to bring the blaze under control. 40 minutes of water and smoke and the sounds of a building dying, the pop of glass, the groan of metal, the wet hiss of water meeting flame. 40 minutes during which Naomi Carter sat on the bumper of an ambulance and said nothing, and felt nothing, because feeling anything would have required acknowledging that this was real, and acknowledging that this was real would have broken something inside her that she needed to keep intact if she was going to survive the next 24 hours. Elias arrived at 2:31. She heard him before she saw him, the sound of a car door slamming with force that suggested the door had personally offended him, followed by rapid footsteps on wet concrete, followed by a voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed by fire itself. "Where is she?" He appeared around the side of the ambulance. His hair was wet. He wore a black shirt half buttoned over what looked like the pants from his gala suit, as if he'd dressed while running. His face was a mask of controlled fury. Not the cold, calculated version she'd seen in the room with Seo, but something rawer, something that burned behind his eyes like a smaller, more personal fire. He looked at Naomi, at the blanket, at the glass embedded in her palms, at the blood on her knees where she'd fallen. Something in his expression fractured. "Are you hurt?" His voice was quiet. Too quiet. The quietness of a man holding back something enormous. "I'm fine. You're bleeding." "It's nothing." He knelt in front of her. Right there on the wet street in his expensive pants, glass crunching beneath his knees. He took her hands and turned them palm up and examined the cuts with the focused intensity of a man who had seen wounds before and knew which ones mattered. "Who called you?" Naomi asked. "The security team. They alerted me the moment you left the compound." His jaw tightened. "You should have woken me." "Why? So you could manage this too? So you could control the narrative?" The words came out sharper than she intended. Or maybe exactly as sharp as she intended. She wasn't sure anymore. The fire and the gala, and Scarlett's smile and Victoria's warning, and the studio built before the wedding, and the 10 years of watching, all of it was compressed inside her chest like a spring wound too tight, and the gallery burning was the thing that finally snapped the coil. Elias didn't flinch. He held her hands and looked at her with an expression that she couldn't decode, because it contained too many things at once, guilt and fury, and something softer that she didn't want to name. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "What?" "The fire investigators are already inside. Accelerant was used. Multiple ignition points." His grip on her hands tightened slightly. "Someone did this deliberately, Naomi." The words hit her like a second impact. Not an accident, Not faulty wiring or a forgotten candle or any of the mundane disasters that destroyed small businesses every day. Someone had walked into her gallery, the only thing in this city that belonged entirely to her, and set it on fire on purpose. "There's something else," Elias said. His voice dropped even lower. The investigators found a message on the gallery floor, painted in accelerant before it was lit. "What message?" He hesitated. She watched his jaw work, watched the muscles in his neck cord as he swallowed something, words or bile or the remnants of whatever composure he'd brought with him to this street. "You don't belong here," he said. 4 words, ordinary words. The kind of words she'd heard in 100 different forms since she was 15 years old, in classrooms and job interviews and grocery stores and the quiet, cutting whispers of people who thought she couldn't hear them. "You don't belong here. You're not one of us. Go back to wherever you came from." But these words had been burned into the floor of the place she'd built to prove all those other words wrong. Naomi pulled her hands free from Elias's grip. She stood up. The blanket fell off her shoulders. She walked toward the ruined gallery, and Elias called her name, but she didn't stop because stopping would mean accepting that someone had destroyed the only proof she had that she mattered, and she wasn't ready to accept that yet. The heat hit her at 10 feet. The building was still smoldering, thin ribbons of smoke curling from the blown-out windows like fingers beckoning her closer. A firefighter intercepted her before she reached the entrance. "Ma'am, the structure isn't safe. I need to see inside. Ma'am." "Let her through." Elias appeared behind her. His voice carried the particular weight of a man whose family name appeared on tax documents and property deeds, and probably a few police personnel files. The firefighter hesitated, then stepped aside. The interior was devastation. Every painting destroyed, every frame warped by heat, the walls blackened and blistered. Water pooled on the concrete floor, mixing with ash and debris to form a gray sludge that covered everything like the aftermath of a flood in a crematorium. The smell was unbearable, smoke and chemicals and the particular acrid sweetness of burned canvas that Naomi knew she would never be able to smell again without feeling her stomach drop. And there, in the center of the floor, charred but still visible, the words, "You don't belong here." Naomi stared at them. She stared until her eyes burned and her vision blurred and the letters dissolved into shapes that didn't mean anything, because if they meant something, she would have to respond to them. And responding meant admitting that after 10 years in this city, after building a career and a reputation and a life from absolute nothing, she was still the outsider, still the foreigner, still the stray. Elias stood behind her. She could feel him there, his presence like a wall between her and whatever came next. "I know who did this," he said. She turned. His face was carved from something harder than stone. His eyes were flat, dead. The eyes of a man who had just switched off every human emotion and replaced them with something mechanical and merciless. "Scarlett," Naomi said. Not a question. "Scarlett," and she didn't act alone. The accelerant profile matches materials used by CO's people. She's working with the loan sharks. His phone was already in his hand. She could see the screen reflecting in his eyes, messages, calls, information flowing toward him through channels she couldn't see. "They want to break the marriage, publicly humiliate you, force a separation, and use the vulnerability to come after the Kang organization's legitimate holdings." "This isn't about me," Naomi said. The realization landed cold and hollow. "The gallery, the fire, the message. It's not about me at all. It's about you. They're using me to get to you." "Yes. And you knew this could happen when you married me, when you brought me into your house. You knew that putting your name on mine would make me a target." Elias said nothing. The silence was louder than the fire had been. "You knew," Naomi repeated, and her voice shook. Not with fear, but with the specific burning fury of a woman who had just realized that the protection she'd been offered was also the thing that put her in danger. The shield was also the target. The shelter was also the storm. "I underestimated them," Elias said. "I won't make that mistake again." "You won't make that mistake again?" Naomi stepped toward him, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat, close enough to smell the rain on his skin and the faint trace of smoke already settling into his clothes. "They burned my gallery, Elias. My gallery. The only thing in this country that was mine, not yours, not your family's, mine. And they burned it because of you. I will fix this." "You can't fix this." You can't write a check and rebuild what was inside those walls. You can't replace 7 years of work with a phone call at 2 in the morning. You can't. Her voice broke. She caught it, held it, forced it back into shape through sheer will. You can't keep pretending that having me in your life is safe for me. I will make it safe. How? By putting more guards at the gate? By watching me on more cameras? By building me another beautiful cage and filling it with paint and telling yourself that's enough? The words hit him. She saw it. The impact. The way his shoulders absorbed the blow, the way his hands, which had been steady all night, curled into fists at his sides. What do you want me to do? He asked. And for the first time, the control cracked. Not completely, not catastrophically, but enough for something human to bleed through. Something desperate and raw and frightened in a way that Elias Kang was never supposed to be frightened. Tell me what you want me to do, Naomi. I want the truth. Right now. All of it. Who is Scarlett Han to you? What was she to you? Why she hates me enough to burn down my life? The rain started again. Light at first, then harder, filling the ruined gallery with the sound of water hitting debris. Elias stood in the wreckage of her life and looked at her with an expression that belonged to a man standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the next words out of his mouth would determine whether he fell. Scarlett was my father's choice, he said. Arranged. Political. A union between the Kang and Han families to consolidate control over the southeastern trade corridor. I was 21, she was 23. We were together for 3 years. Together how? Every way two people can be together when neither of them has a choice. His voice was flat, clinical. The voice of a man describing a wound he'd learned to live with by pretending it belonged to someone else. She loved the power, the name, the access. When my father died and I restructured the family's operations, the arrangement with the Han family dissolved. Scarlett was removed from the inner circle. She never forgave it. She wasn't removed. You removed her. Yes, and she thinks I replaced her. She thinks you represent everything she lost: status, proximity, control. He paused. She's wrong. She lost those things because they were never hers. They belonged to an arrangement that died when my father died. That's very rational, Elias, very logical, very Kang. Naomi's voice was ice. But Scarlett isn't being rational. She's being vindictive, and vindictive people burn things down. She looked around the gallery, at the ruined walls, at the ash-covered floor, at the message still visible beneath the water and debris. You don't belong here. I need to know one more thing, she said, and I need you to answer honestly, because if you lie to me right now, I will walk out of this marriage tonight, and I will not come back. Ask? Did you marry me to protect me, or did you marry me because you wanted me and the debt was just a convenient excuse? The question cut through everything: the smoke, the rain, the careful architecture of justifications and rationalizations that Elias had built around this arrangement like walls around a fortress. She watched him process it, watched the calculation behind his eyes as he weighed the cost of truth against the cost of lies. Both, he said. One word: quiet, devastating. I married you because you were in danger, and because I'd spent 10 years wanting to be close to you, and because the debt gave me a reason that didn't require me to admit what I actually felt. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The contract is real. The terms are real. You can leave in 2 years, and I will honor every clause. But if you're asking me whether this was ever purely transactional— He stopped, breathed, started again. No, it wasn't. It was never just an arrangement for me, and I should have told you that from the beginning. Naomi stood in the ruins of her gallery and looked at the man she'd married and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not the physical ground, but the psychological ground, the foundation of certainty she'd built this arrangement on. The contract was supposed to be the safe thing, the clear thing. 2 years, public appearances, separate bedrooms, walk away clean. But there was no clean anymore. The gallery was gone. Scarlett was coming, and the man standing in front of her had just admitted that the careful, controlled transaction she'd agreed to was actually something else entirely, something messy and human and terrifying in ways the contract could never contain. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, different from the fire station. She answered. Mrs. Kang. Scarlett's voice, silk and venom. I hope you're enjoying the renovation. You're insane. I'm focused. There's a difference. A pause. The gallery was a warning. The next one won't be. You have 72 hours to file for divorce and leave Korea. If you don't, I'll make sure every person in Seoul knows exactly what you are. A desperate, debt-ridden nobody who sold herself to the highest bidder. I have documentation, financial records, photographs of every meeting between you and Jae-hoon Seo's people. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to show your face in this city again. The line went dead. Naomi lowered the phone. Her hand was steady, her breathing was steady. Everything was steady except the thing inside her chest that had been cracking since the night she signed the contract and had just finally, irreversibly, broken open. She looked at Elias. 72 hours, she said. I heard. She's going to expose everything. She's going to try. Naomi stepped closer, close enough to see the rain on his face, the smoke in his hair, the pulse hammering in the vein along his throat, close enough to see the man behind the empire, exhausted, terrified, desperate in a way that no amount of money or power or violence could fix. Then we stopped pretending, she said. No more contract, no more arrangement, no more separate bedrooms and public performances and careful distances. Her voice was raw, stripped, the voice of a woman who had just watched everything she owned turn to ash and discovered that the only thing left standing was the man in front of her. If we're going to war with this woman, we do it together, not as business partners, not as co-stars in some performance, together, for real. Elias looked at her. Rain fell between them. Ash settled on their shoulders. The ruined gallery smoldered behind them like the remains of a world that no longer existed. Are you sure? He asked. And Naomi realized, standing in the wreckage with smoke in her lungs and glass in her palms and the taste of whiskey still fading on her tongue, that she had never been less sure of anything in her life. But certainty was a luxury for people who hadn't lost everything. Yes, she said. And the word felt like stepping off a cliff. Elias made 14 phone calls in the car ride back to the compound. Naomi sat beside him and listened to a man dismantle his own restraint one conversation at a time. The first 3 calls were in Korean, rapid, clipped, the kind of language that didn't waste syllables on courtesy. The 4th was in English to someone whose voice she could hear through the phone's speaker, tight and nervous, answering questions about port access and shipping manifests. The 5th was silence. Elias listening to someone speak for 2 uninterrupted minutes, his jaw grinding slowly, the tendons in his neck standing out like cables under tension. By the 7th call, Naomi understood what was happening. He was going to war, not metaphorically, not the sanitized corporate version where lawyers filed motions and accountants froze assets. Real war. The kind that happened in the spaces between Seoul's polished surface, in warehouse basements and parking garages, and private rooms above restaurants that served food nobody ordered. The kind where men disappeared and money moved and entire organizations woke up one morning to find that the ground beneath them had been quietly removed during the night. The compound was awake when they arrived. Every light burning, men moving through corridors with purpose, carrying laptops and files, and the controlled urgency of a military operation spooling up. The armored gate opened before the car reached it. The driver didn't slow down. Elias led Naomi through the main house to a room she hadn't seen before, a reinforced office on the ground floor behind a door that required both a keypad and a biometric scan. Inside, screens covering an entire wall, feeds from security cameras she hadn't known existed, data streams in Korean and English scrolling in real time. 4 men sat at workstations. They stood when Elias entered. He waved them back down without looking at them. Show me everything on the Han family's financial network, Elias said. One of the men, mid-30s, wire-rimmed glasses, the posture of someone who spent more time with data than people, pulled up a series of documents on the central screen. Financial flows. Shell companies. Bank accounts linked through 3 layers of intermediaries to a central holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. Scarlett's been moving money through her family's secondary accounts for 6 months, the man said. Small amounts, below reporting thresholds. But the pattern is consistent. She's funding something. Seo, Elias said. We think so. The funds route through a construction company in Incheon that's been dormant for 2 years. The same company holds the lease on 3 commercial properties near the port. One of them is an abandoned shipping terminal. Elias finished. The man nodded. Naomi watched this from a chair in the corner. She watched Elias transform from the man who had knelt on wet glass to hold her hands into something else entirely. A machine. Precise. Relentless. Every question targeted, every instruction specific. He moved through information the way a surgeon moved through tissue, cutting away what was irrelevant, isolating what mattered, working towards something deep and vital with hands that never trembled. She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But the terror was wrapped around something harder, something that had crystallized in the ruins of her gallery when she'd looked at the words burned into the floor and decided that she was done being the woman things happened to. "I want to help," she said. Elias looked at her. The machine expression flickered. Something human surfaced. Concern, reluctance, the protective instinct that Victoria had warned her about. "Naomi, don't. Don't manage me right now. I just lost everything I've built in this city, and the woman who did it gave me 72 hours to run. I'm not running, so either let me help or tell me to my face that you think I'm too fragile to be useful." The room went quiet. The four men at their workstations suddenly found their screens intensely fascinating. Elias studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair beside his and gestured. "Sit down," he said. "We have a lot of ground to cover." They worked through the night. By dawn, Naomi understood the full architecture of what Scarlett had built. It wasn't just personal revenge, it was a coup, a carefully orchestrated assault on the Kang organization's legitimate business holdings, using Naomi as the pressure point. Scarlett's plan was surgical. Expose the marriage as fraudulent, use the scandal to destabilize Elias's public partnerships, then leverage the chaos to allow CO's network to seize control of the port operations that the Kang family had spent 3 years transitioning from criminal enterprise to legal commerce. It was brilliant, it was vicious, and it was already in motion. "The documentation she mentioned," Naomi said, reading through a file that one of Elias's analysts had assembled. "The financial records, the photographs. She has proof that the marriage was transactional?" "She has pieces," Elias said, "circumstantial, but enough to build a narrative. In Seoul's social circles, narrative is more powerful than evidence." "Then we need a better narrative." Elias looked at her. That flicker again. The admission of something he couldn't control, couldn't calculate, couldn't design from the foundation up. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that we stop being fake." Naomi met his eyes. "You told me the truth at the gallery, that this was never purely transactional, that you've been watching me for 10 years, that you married me because you wanted to, not just because you could." She paused. "So make it real, publicly, completely, not as a strategy, as the truth. And if it doesn't work, then at least we're not lying anymore." The words hung between them in the blue light of the screens. The analyst pretended not to listen. Somewhere in the house, a phone rang and stopped. Elias reached across the space between them and took her hand. Not the careful, controlled touch of a man managing a performance. Something rougher, desperate. The grip of a man holding on to the edge of something he'd been falling from for a decade. "Okay," he said. 27 hours later, Scarlett made her move. The photographs went live on 3 major Korean entertainment news sites, simultaneously at 9 a.m. Images of Naomi entering the meeting with CO's people, the sedan outside the underground parking garage, the loan documents with her name attached. The accompanying article called her a debt-ridden foreigner who had manipulated a vulnerable heir into a sham marriage. The language was careful enough to avoid outright libel, but devastating enough to destroy a reputation in hours. By noon, the story had been picked up by 4 additional outlets. By 2, it was trending. By 4, reporters were gathered outside the Kang compound's front gate, cameras pointed at the walls like weapons. Naomi watched the coverage on her phone. Each headline landed like a fist, calculated, precise, designed to bruise in exactly the places that hurt most. The comments were worse. Thousands of strangers passing judgment on a life they knew nothing about, dissecting her motivations and her marriage, and her worth as a human being with the casual cruelty that anonymity made possible. But she didn't cry. She didn't hide. She sat in the studio Elias had built for her, the studio he'd planned before she agreed to any of this, and she painted. She painted the gallery on fire. Elias came to her at 5. He stood in the doorway and watched her work for a full minute before speaking. "We have a problem," he said. "We have several." Seo made contact through a back channel. He's offering to make the media coverage disappear in exchange for the port operations. Blackmail. Leverage. His word, not mine. Elias's expression was carved granite. He also sent a message about you specifically. What message? That the original arrangement still stands. 2 years. His club. Your body as payment. Elias's voice didn't change, but something in the room shifted. The temperature, the pressure, the quality of light, as if the walls themselves had absorbed his fury and were radiating it back. He said the offer has a 24-hour expiration. After that, he'll release additional material to the press. Things he claims will make the current coverage look mild. What additional material? I don't know. But Seo doesn't bluff. Naomi set down her brush, looked at the canvas, the burning gallery rendered in oils that were still wet, colors bleeding into each other like wounds that hadn't closed. "So we have 24 hours, she said. "We have less than that. My people intercepted a communication between Scarlett and Seo 90 minutes ago. They're meeting tonight. An abandoned shipping terminal at Incheon Port, the same property linked to the shell company." He paused. "I believe they're consolidating, preparing for the final phase. Whatever Seo has, Scarlett is going to use it as the death blow. Then we go to the terminal." "Naomi, we go to the terminal tonight, before they consolidate, before they launch whatever they're planning." She stood, paint on her hands, fire on the canvas behind her. The face of a woman who had spent 32 years being pushed and pushed and pushed and had finally reached the wall at the end of the hallway. "I'm tired of reacting, Elias. I'm tired of sitting in beautiful rooms waiting for the next bomb to drop. They came after me, my gallery, my name, my life. I want to look Scarlett in the eyes, and I want her to know that I didn't run. It could be dangerous. Everything about this has been dangerous since the night you walked through that door." Elias looked at her. Rain had started again outside the studio windows, on the same relentless rain that had been falling since the night they met, as if Seoul itself was trying to wash something away. "I'll have a team ready by 10, he said. "I'll be ready by 9. The drive to Incheon took 40 minutes. 2 vehicles. The armored sedan carrying Elias and Naomi, a tactical SUV following with 6 men whose faces Naomi had never seen and whose names Elias didn't offer. The city blurred past the windows, neon dissolving into highway lights, dissolving into the industrial darkness of the port district, where cranes stood against the sky like metal skeletons, and shipping containers stacked in rows that stretched toward the horizon. The terminal was at the end of a service road that dead-ended at the water, a massive structure, corrugated steel walls, loading docks sealed with rust, broken windows along the upper level that looked like missing teeth. 2 vehicles were already parked outside, a black Mercedes and a white van, lights visible through the ground floor windows. Movement. Elias's team secured the perimeter in silence. Naomi watched them move, professionals, coordinated, communicating through hand signals and earpieces with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this many times before. "Stay behind me," Elias said. "No." "Naomi, I said no. I walk in with you or I walk in alone. Choose." He looked at her. The rain had plastered his hair to his forehead. Water ran down his face. His jaw worked. And then something passed through his expression. Not surrender, but recognition. The acknowledgement that the woman standing in front of him was not the same woman who had sat trembling at a marble table 2 weeks ago. That woman had been afraid. This woman was furious. And fury, Elias understood, was a more useful fuel than fear could ever be. "Together," he said. They entered through a loading dock on the east side. The interior was vast, a cathedral of rust and concrete stacked with abandoned shipping containers and industrial debris. Fluorescent lights hung from the ceiling on chains, swinging slightly in a draft that came from somewhere deep inside the building, casting shadows that moved like living things. Voices echoed from a central clearing near the back. Scarlett's. And another, male, calm, familiar. CO. Elias raised a hand. His team halted. He and Naomi moved forward through the maze of containers, footsteps silent on the concrete floor until they reached a gap between two rusted steel boxes and could see into the open space beyond. Scarlett stood beside a folding table covered with documents and a laptop. She wore black, coat, boots, gloves, dressed for the occasion the way a woman dressed for a funeral she'd planned herself. Seo sat in a metal chair across from her, legs crossed, the same reading glasses perched on his nose, the same expression of avuncular patience that had made Naomi's skin crawl in the Gangnam Lounge. 3 of Seo's men stood along the walls, armed, alert, eyes scanning the dark edges of the terminal with the focused awareness of animals guarding territory. The final media package goes out at midnight, Scarlett was saying. Everything. The original debt documents, the marriage timeline, the contract terms. By morning, every outlet in Korea will have proof that Elias Kang's marriage is a fraud. His board of directors will call an emergency meeting by noon. And by this time tomorrow, the port operations will be in transition. And the woman? Seo asked. Casual, bored, asking about Naomi the way someone asks about weather. She'll have nowhere to go, no gallery, no reputation, no husband willing to publicly claim her once the truth is out. Scarlett smiled. She'll come to you eventually, they always do. No, Naomi said. Her voice cut through the terminal like a blade thrown from the dark. Every head turned. Seo's men reached for their weapons. Scarlett's expression, that confident, controlled mask, cracked for one beautiful, satisfying second. Naomi stepped out from behind the container. Elias was beside her. Behind them, emerging from the shadows like ghosts materializing from walls, his team appeared at every exit, every angle, every line of sight. The terminal was surrounded. Scarlett recovered fast. She straightened, smoothed her coat, let the mask reassemble. Elias, she said. How dramatic. It's over, Scarlett. Is it? She glanced at the men appearing behind him, at the exits being blocked, at the tactical reality of the situation settling around her like a net. You brought soldiers to a business meeting. That seems excessive. You burned my wife's gallery. You threatened her life. You conspired with a human trafficker to destroy her. Elias's voice was flat, dead. The voice of a man who had already made every decision that mattered and was simply announcing the results. Excessive doesn't begin to describe what I brought. Seo stood slowly. His chair scraped against concrete. The sound echoed through the terminal like a single note played on an instrument made of rust. Mr. Kang, Seo said, and his voice still carried that maddening warmth, that paternal patience. Let's not be hasty. There are arrangements that benefit everyone in this room. Your wife's debt is a small matter, a rounding error. Surely we can— Her debt was paid the day she took my name, Elias said, and you have nothing in this room that I can't take. Something shifted in Seo's expression. The warmth drained away. What remained was the real face, the one that had been hiding behind reading glasses and kind smiles for years. Cold. Calculating. The face of a man who had built an empire on other people's desperation and was now, for the first time, confronted by someone whose desperation was bigger than his. Take them, Seo said quietly. His men moved. What happened next was not elegant. It was not choreographed. It was not the clean, precise violence of movies where every punch lands perfectly and nobody bleeds from the wrong places. It was chaos. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously. The fluorescent lights shattered. Darkness crashed over the terminal like a wave. Naomi hit the concrete floor on instinct. Hands over her head, face down, the taste of dust and rust filling her mouth while the world exploded around her in muzzle flashes and screaming, and the percussive thunder of weapons being fired in an enclosed space that turned every shot into an avalanche of sound. Elias was above her, over her, his body between hers and the gunfire, shielding her with the only armor he had, himself. She could feel his heartbeat through his back, hammering against her chest, impossibly fast, impossibly strong. "Stay down!" he shouted. "Stay down, Naomi, stay down!" The firefight lasted 90 seconds. It felt like 90 years. When the shooting stopped, the silence that followed was worse, a ringing, suffocating void filled with the smell of cordite and the sound of men breathing hard and the distant drip of water from a broken pipe somewhere overhead. Elias pulled her up, his hands on her arms, his face close to hers, blood on his temple. A graze, shallow, already streaming down the side of his face in a thin red line that made him look like a man who'd just fought his way out of something that should have killed him. "Are you hit?" His voice was raw, shredded. The controlled composure stripped away entirely, leaving nothing but the man underneath, desperate, shaking, alive. "No, I'm okay. Elias, I'm okay." He held her face in both hands, looked at her with an intensity that burned. Then he kissed her, hard, desperate, tasting like blood and smoke and rain. And she kissed him back because there was nothing left to pretend about, nothing left to calculate or manage or design. Just two people in the dark, breathing. And then a sound from deeper inside the terminal, metal scraping on concrete, a door slamming. And Elias pulled back with the wild focus of a man whose survival instincts hadn't finished firing. "Scarlett," he said. She ran. He looked toward the back of the terminal, toward the darkness beyond the containers, toward the sound of footsteps retreating toward the loading docks on the far side of the building. And then another sound, closer. A phone ringing from the table Scarlett had been standing beside. Elias moved toward it, picked it up, listened. His expression changed. The blood drained from his face so fast Naomi could see it happen in the fractured emergency lighting, a living man becoming a ghost in real time. "What?" Naomi said. "Elias, what is it?" He lowered the phone, looked at her, and in his eyes was something she had never seen in all the days she'd known him. Not anger, not control, not the quiet intensity of a man who designed outcomes from the foundation up. Terror. "She has a secondary location," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A backup plan. If the terminal was compromised, she was supposed to... Supposed to what? She took something from the compound. While we were here. While every guard was deployed with us." He swallowed. The sound was audible. "She took the original contract, Naomi. Our marriage contract. The real one. With every clause. Every term. Every detail about the arrangement." The words landed like a bomb with a delayed fuse. Naomi felt them detonate somewhere deep inside her chest. Not the explosion itself, but the understanding of what came next. The original contract. The document that proved everything Scarlett had claimed. The irrefutable, undeniable evidence that their marriage was a transaction, negotiated and signed like a business deal, with expiration dates and exit clauses and the clinical language of two people who had agreed to fake something that was supposed to be real. If that contract went public, no amount of genuine feeling between them would matter. The narrative would be written, the damage would be permanent, and everything they'd built in the ashes of the gallery, the raw, terrifying, real thing growing between them, would be buried under an avalanche of proof that it started as a lie. "Where is she?" Naomi asked. Elias looked at his phone, at the message glowing on the screen, at the address typed beneath a single line of text from Scarlett Hahn. The message read, "You should have let me win." And below it, an address in Gangnam, a building Naomi recognized, the same building where her nightmare began. The sedan cut through Gangnam at 90 kilometers per hour, with the rain hammering the windshield so hard the wipers couldn't keep up. Naomi sat in the passenger seat with her hands pressed flat against her thighs because if she didn't press them down, they would shake, and she refused to shake anymore. Elias drove. No driver this time. No second vehicle. No team. He'd left them at the terminal to process the scene and secure Seo's men, and he'd taken the wheel himself because what came next was not organizational. It was personal. The blood on his temple had dried to a dark crust. He hadn't wiped it, hadn't acknowledged it. His eyes were locked on the road with the focus of a man navigating not through traffic, but through the final corridor of something that had been building for years. Longer than the marriage, longer than the debt, longer than the decade he'd spent watching a woman from the edges of her life. This was the corridor where everything converged, where the architecture he'd spent his entire existence constructing either held or collapsed. "She'll have people there," Naomi said. "No, Seo's men are finished. The terminal was his last operational base in the city. Whatever Scarlett has left, she has alone." "You're sure?" "I'm sure of very little right now." He glanced at her, just a flash, his eyes leaving the road for half a second. "I'm sure of you." The building appeared through the rain like a memory she'd tried to bury. The same underground parking garage, the same concrete, the same service elevator at the far end of the floor where she'd walked in borrowed shoes 6 weeks ago, with her pulse thundering and her life balanced on the edge of something she couldn't see. Elias parked, cut the engine. The silence that followed was enormous. Rain on metal, the tick of the cooling engine, the sound of two people breathing in the dark. "Let me go alone," Naomi said. "No." "Elias, listen to me." She turned to face him. His profile was sharp against the gray light from the garage entrance, the cut on his temple, the tension in his jaw, the exhaustion that lived in the lines around his eyes that she'd never noticed before because he'd always been so careful about what he let people see. "Scarlett doesn't want you. She wants to prove that I'm nothing without you, that I'm the debt-ridden nobody she's been telling Seoul I am. If you walk in there and take the contract from her by force, she wins. Even if we destroy the document, she wins. Because the story will always be that Elias Kang's wife needed Elias Kang to save her." "I don't care about the story." "I do." Her voice cracked. She caught it, held it. "I care because this is the only thing I have left. The gallery is gone. My reputation is shredded. Every piece of art I ever made is ash. The only thing Scarlett hasn't taken from me is my ability to stand in a room and not flinch. And if you take that away by fighting my battle for me, then she was right. I am a project. I am a stray. I am exactly what everyone in this city already thinks I am." The words filled the car like smoke. Elias gripped the steering wheel with both hands. His knuckles whitened. The tendons in his forearms stood out like wires, and Naomi could see the war happening behind his eyes. The protector instinct fighting against the part of him that understood what she was saying, that recognized the truth in it, that knew she was right even though every cell in his body was screaming at him to go upstairs and end this the way Kang men had always ended things. 5 minutes, he said. His voice was barely there, ground down to almost nothing. 5 minutes, and then I'm coming up. 10. 7. Fine. She got out of the car. The parking garage was cold. Her footsteps echoed the way they had 6 weeks ago. The same concrete, the same fluorescent hum, the same countdown feeling of walking towards something irreversible. But 6 weeks ago, she'd been terrified. Tonight, she was something else, something that lived on the other side of terror, in the space where fear burned off, and left behind a residue that was harder and quieter and more dangerous than anything fear could produce. The elevator took her up. The mirrored walls showed her reflection, paint still under her fingernails, blood dried on her knees from the gallery sidewalk, her hair tangled and her clothes wrinkled and her eyes carrying something she almost didn't recognize. She looked like a woman who had been through a war. She looked like a woman who was about to finish one. The hallway was empty. The same dark wood paneling, the same thick carpet, the same oppressive luxury designed to make visitors feel small. The door to the lounge was open. Scarlett sat at the marble table, the same table where Seoul had spread photographs of Naomi's life, the same table where Elias had first said the word marriage, and the world had cracked open like an egg dropped from a height. Scarlett sat in Seoul's chair at the head of the table with the marriage contract laid out in front of her. 23 pages of legal text that contained every clause, every term, every clinical detail of an arrangement that had started as a transaction and become something neither party had planned for. A laptop sat open beside the contract, screen glowing, a media upload interface visible, ready to distribute the document to every outlet that had already published Scarlett's first wave of coverage. Scarlett looked up when Naomi entered. She didn't look surprised. She looked satisfied. The expression of a woman who had designed this exact moment, this exact confrontation, this exact image of Naomi Carter walking into a room alone to face the consequences of choices she never should have been forced to make. "You came without him," Scarlett said. "I'm almost impressed." Naomi walked to the table. She didn't sit. She stood across from Scarlett and looked down at the contract and felt something move through her chest. Not anger, not grief, but a strange, cold clarity. The kind of clarity that came when you'd lost everything and discovered that the bottom was actually solid ground you could stand on. "Publish it," Naomi said. Scarlett blinked. The satisfaction flickered. "Excuse me?" "The contract, the terms, the clause about separate bedrooms and public appearances, and the 2-year expiration. Publish all of it." Naomi pulled out the chair across from Scarlett and sat down. Slowly, deliberately. The way a woman sits when she's decided that running is no longer an option she's willing to consider. "Go ahead. Send it to every outlet in Korea. Let them read every word." Scarlett studied her. looking for the trap, the bluff, the hidden strategy. You're not serious. I'm completely serious. You spent 6 months planning this. You burned my gallery. You partnered with a man who wanted to sell my body. You tried to destroy my reputation and my marriage and my life. And the only leverage you have left is a document that proves Elias Kang offered me a way out when nobody else would. Naomi leaned forward. Her voice was steady, stone steady. The steadiness of a woman who had nothing left to lose and had discovered that nothing was actually the most powerful thing you could own. So publish it. Show the world that a woman in debt agreed to a marriage contract to protect herself. Show them that a man used his resources to save someone instead of exploit them. Show them the terms. No forced intimacy. No ownership. No cruelty hidden in legal language. Let people read that contract and decide for themselves whether it proves I'm a fraud or proves I'm a survivor. The room was silent. Rain on the windows. The hum of the laptop. The sound of Scarlett Hahn recalculating everything she thought she knew about the woman sitting across from her. "They'll destroy you," Scarlett said. But her voice had changed. The silk was gone. Underneath was something thinner, more brittle. "The media, the public, Seoul society, they'll tear you apart. They've been tearing me apart since I was 15 years old." Naomi's eyes didn't leave Scarlett's. "I'm still here. Elias will lose everything. His board, his partnerships, the legitimate operations he spent years building. One hint of scandal, and his investors will bolt. Maybe. And if they do, he'll still have more than you ever had. Because he'll have someone who stayed, not for the money, not for the name, not for the power." Naomi paused, let the words land. "For him. And that's the part you never understood, Scarlett. You spent 3 years with him, and you never once loved the man. You loved the kingdom. And when the kingdom changed shape, you had nothing left." The hit was direct, surgical. Naomi saw it land in the way Scarlett's hands tightened on the edge of the table, in the way her jaw clenched, in the micro tremor that passed through her lower lip before she caught it and forced it still. "You don't know what I had," Scarlett said. Her voice was quiet, damaged. The voice of a woman confronting something she'd buried so deep she'd forgotten it was there. "I know what you lost. And I know why you're here. Not because you want to destroy me. Because destroying me is easier than admitting that Elias never loved you, and the arrangement you thought was permanent was just another contract with an expiration date you didn't read." Scarlett stood. The chair scraped back. Her hands were shaking. Visible, undeniable, the tremor of someone whose armor had been cracked from the inside. "You think you've won?" Scarlett's voice rose. Not a shout. Something worse. The raw, ragged sound of a woman losing control of a narrative she'd spent years writing. "You think standing there and playing the noble survivor changes anything? I can still destroy you. One click, one upload. It's over." "Then click," Naomi said. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't breathe harder or lean back or show any of the fear that was absolutely, undeniably present in her body, present in her hammering pulse and her clenched stomach, and the cold sweat running down her spine. She held every molecule of terror inside and presented the surface of a woman made from stone. Because that's what survival looked like when you'd been practicing it for 17 years in a city that never wanted you. Scarlett's hand moved toward the laptop, hovered over the trackpad, her finger trembling above the button that would send 23 pages of clinical language into the world and blow apart everything Naomi and Elias had built from the rubble of a transaction that had somehow, impossibly, become real. Her finger stayed there, hovering, trembling. The seconds stretched. 5, 10, 15, and then Scarlett's hand dropped. She didn't click. She stood there behind the marble table, in the same room where 6 weeks ago, a different woman had sat in that same chair and been told she had no options. And something collapsed inside Scarlett Hahn. Not dramatically, not with tears or shouting or any of the theatrical gestures that people expected from moments of defeat. It was quieter than that, smaller. The silent implosion of a woman realizing that the weapon she'd spent months building couldn't fire because the target had refused to be a target. "Why?" Scarlett whispered. "Why would you let me publish it? Why would you risk everything?" "Because I'm not afraid of the truth anymore," Naomi said. "I was afraid of it 6 weeks ago. I was afraid of what people would think and what the contract meant, and what it said about me that I agreed to marry a man I barely knew to escape a debt I didn't create. But I'm not afraid now, because the truth isn't that I was bought. The truth is that I was drowning and someone threw me a rope and I was smart enough to grab it. And everything that happened after, the real part, the part where I fell in love with him, that happened because of who we are, not because of what we signed. The words sat in the room like something newly born. Love. She'd said it out loud for the first time, not to Elias, not in a moment of romance or tenderness, but in a room full of marble and malice, to the woman who'd tried to destroy her. And it was the truest thing she'd ever said. Scarlett closed the laptop, slowly. The click of it shutting was quiet and final, the sound of a chapter ending. "He'll never love you the way you want him to," Scarlett said. But the venom was gone. What remained was something that almost sounded like warning, like one woman telling another the truth she'd learned the hard way. "The Kang men consume everything they love." "I know," Naomi said. "I'm not easy to consume." Scarlett picked up her coat, walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. "The contract is yours," she said. "Take it, burn it, frame it. I don't care anymore." Her eyes were red. Her voice was hoarse. She looked, for the first time since Naomi had met her, like a human being instead of a weapon. "Just don't waste what you have, because some of us never got the chance to have it real." She left. Naomi sat alone at the marble table for the second time in her life. She picked up the contract, all 23 pages, and held it in her hands and felt the weight of everything it represented. The transaction, the arrangement, the clinical language of two people who had agreed to pretend. Elias appeared in the doorway 6 minutes later. He took in the room, the empty chair where Scarlett had been, the closed laptop, the contract in Naomi's hands. The blood was still on his temple. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. He looked like a man who had been sitting in a parking garage counting seconds and losing his mind. "Is it over?" he asked. "It's over." He crossed the room, knelt in front of her chair the way he'd knelt on the wet street outside the gallery, the way he seemed to always end up on his knees in front of her, as if the most powerful man in Seoul could only be himself at her feet. "What did she say?" "She said the Kang men consume everything they love." "She's not wrong." "I know." Naomi looked at him, at the cut on his temple, at the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, at the man behind the empire, behind the name, behind the decade of watching and wanting and waiting. "But I'm not everything, Elias. I'm just me. And me is what you get. Not a project, not a performance, not something you can design from the foundation up." "I know." "Do you?" "Because I need you to understand something." She held up the contract. "This is where we started. A transaction, terms and conditions, expiration dates. And I need to know, right now, in this room, whether you can let go of the version of this that you planned and accept the version that actually happened." "What version is that?" "The messy one. The one where I yell at you and paint at 5 a.m. and refuse to let you protect me from things I need to face myself. The one where your mother thinks I'm a stray and the whole city thinks I'm a fraud, and nothing about us makes sense to anyone except us." Elias took the contract from her hands. He looked at it. 23 pages of carefully constructed fiction that had somehow produced the only real thing in his life. "I don't want the contract," he said. "I haven't wanted the contract since the night you told me to stop watching you." He set the pages on the table. "I want the mess. I want the 5 a.m. painting. I want the fighting and the refusal and the woman who walked into this room alone because she was too stubborn to let me do it for her." Naomi felt something crack open inside her. Not the breaking kind of crack, the other kind, the kind where light gets in through a fissure that's been sealed too tight for too long. She kissed him, slowly. Not the desperate collision from the terminal, something different, something that tasted like rain and smoke and the particular flavor of two people who had been through enough to know that what came next would be hard and imperfect and worth every difficult minute. "Take me home," she said. He did. The fallout unfolded over weeks. Seo's operation collapsed like a building demolished from the inside. Arrests, frozen accounts, evidence delivered to prosecutors through channels that Naomi never asked about, and Elias never explained. The loan sharks who had once spread photographs of her life across a marble table vanished into the machinery of a justice system that, when properly motivated by the right family, could move with terrifying efficiency. Seo himself disappeared from Seoul. Whether into a prison cell or something quieter, Naomi didn't ask. Some answers were better left unfound. Scarlett Han left Korea. The entertainment news sites reported it as an extended stay abroad. No scandal, no public collapse. Just a woman who had once been part of Seoul's inner circle, quietly removing herself from the picture. Naomi thought about her sometimes, about the trembling hand above the trackpad, about the red eyes and the hoarse voice, and the warning that almost sounded like wisdom. She didn't forgive Scarlett. Forgiveness required processing, and some wounds needed years before you could look at them directly. But she understood her, and understanding Naomi had learned was sometimes more useful than forgiveness. Victoria Kang remained Victoria Kang. She did not soften, she did not apologize. She did not suddenly transform into the warm, welcoming mother-in-law that movies pretended existed, but something shifted in the way she occupied the same space as Naomi. A recalibration, subtle and wordless, like a predator acknowledging that another predator had entered its territory and deciding that coexistence was more efficient than conflict. At dinner one evening, 3 weeks after the terminal, Victoria poured Naomi's tea before her own. A small gesture, almost invisible. But Naomi caught it, and when she looked up, Victoria met her eyes with an expression that wasn't warmth but was adjacent to it. Respect. The grudging, hard-won respect of a woman who had spent her entire life surrounded by men who consumed and a daughter-in-law who refused to be consumed. Elias began the work of dismantling what remained of the Kang Empire's shadow operations. It was not clean. It was not fast. There were nights when he came home at 2 in the morning with the weight of impossible decisions living in his shoulders and the smell of rooms she'd never enter clinging to his clothes. There were arguments, real ones, ugly ones, the kind where doors slammed and silence lasted hours, and reconciliation came not through grand gestures, but through the small, difficult act of sitting across from someone and saying I was wrong without knowing if they were ready to hear it. He was not a perfect man. He was not a reformed man. He was a man in the process of becoming something he'd never been designed to be. And the process was slow and painful and filled with setbacks that made Naomi want to scream. But he was trying. And trying, she discovered, mattered more than succeeding. Naomi rebuilt the gallery. Not quickly, not with Kang money. She applied for grants, she took on freelance curation work. She sold 3 paintings to a collector in Busan who'd seen her work online and didn't care about the tabloid coverage. She found a new space, smaller than the original, on a quieter street in Hanam-dong, with imperfect lighting and a landlord who charged too much, and walls that needed 3 coats of paint before they stopped looking like a place where people gave up. She named it Belonging. Elias funded the security system and the insurance policy and nothing else, because she asked him not to, and because he was learning, slowly, imperfectly, with the awkward effort of a man rewiring instincts that had been reinforced for a lifetime, that protecting someone didn't always mean providing for them. Sometimes it meant stepping back. Sometimes it meant watching from the edges while the person you loved built something with their own hands, even when your hands were bigger and your resources were deeper and every fiber of your being screamed that you could do it faster and better and safer. He stepped back. He watched. He stood at the edges. And Naomi built. The opening night was a Thursday in October. Rain, naturally. Seoul apparently believed that every important moment in Naomi's life should be accompanied by water falling from the sky. The gallery filled slowly. Artists she'd supported over the years, curators who'd dismissed her work and were now curious about the woman who'd survived a public scandal and come back swinging. Diplomats, journalists, a handful of celebrities whose publicists had decided that attending the reopening of a controversial gallery was the right kind of edgy. Victoria came. She stood near the entrance in a charcoal coat and pearl earrings and examined each piece with the critical eye of a woman who had opinions about everything and shared them with no one. She stayed for 45 minutes. When she left, she paused beside Naomi and said one word: better. Naomi didn't know if she meant the art or the gallery or the woman. She decided it didn't matter. The crowd thickened. Conversations layered over each other. Wine glasses clinked. The new space smelled like fresh paint and possibility, and the particular charged energy that filled a room when creative work was being witnessed for the first time. Naomi moved through the crowd and accepted compliments and answered questions and smiled for photographs and did all the things that gallery owners did on opening nights. but her attention kept drifting toward the back wall, toward the single piece she'd hung there that morning, the last painting she'd completed, the one that had taken her 3 weeks and 4 false starts, and 2 nights of sitting on the studio floor at 3 in the morning, wondering if she'd forgotten how to make anything honest. It was a self-portrait, the second one she'd ever painted. In the first, painted at 22, she'd stood in a burning room with her back to the viewer, running from nothing, running toward nothing, frozen in the space between destruction and survival. In this one, she faced forward. The room behind her was still burning, the flames painted in oranges and golds that pulsed with a heat you could almost feel. But she wasn't looking at the fire. She was looking out of the canvas, directly at whoever stood in front of it. Her expression was not peaceful, not triumphant, not any of the clean, simple emotions that artists use to signal resolution. She looked tired. She looked strong. She looked like a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side smelling like smoke, and was okay with that because the smoke was proof of something. Proof that she'd been there. Proof that she'd survived. Proof that the burning room had not consumed her. Elias stood in front of the painting. He'd been there for 20 minutes. Naomi had been watching him watch it. The way he stood with his hands in his pockets and his weight slightly forward, leaning into the canvas the way he'd leaned into her life. No guards tonight, no earpiece, no armored car waiting outside. Just a man in a dark suit with a scar on his temple that had healed into a thin white line that she'd started tracing with her fingertip in the mornings while he slept. She crossed the gallery floor. The crowd parted for her. Not because she was Mrs. Kang, but because something in the way she moved told people that she was going somewhere specific and they should get out of the way. She stood beside him, looked at the painting, looked at him looking at the painting. "You're staring at it again," she said. Elias smiled. Not the controlled half-smile he wore in public, a real smile. Tired. Imperfect. The smile of a man who had spent his entire life designing outcomes and had finally found one he couldn't have predicted. "No," he said. "I'm staring at the woman who survived everything." Naomi looked at him, at the scar, at the smile, at the man who had walked into a room full of monsters and knelt at her feet and offered her a door she didn't know she needed. "The contract expired last week," she said. "Technically, I'm free to go." "I know. I'm not going." "I know that too." She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, firm, warm, slightly rough from the work he'd been doing with his hands lately because dismantling empires apparently involved more manual labor than expected. "No more contracts," she said. No more arrangements. No more terms and conditions." "What instead?" "This." She squeezed his hand. "Whatever this is, we figure it out as we go. No expiration date, no exit clause. Just us, making it up as we go along." Elias turned to face her. The gallery buzzed around them. Voices, laughter, the clink of glasses, the sound of people looking at art and being moved by it. None of it mattered. The entire room could have been on fire and neither of them would have noticed. "I spent 10 years watching you from a distance," he said, "telling myself it was enough just to know you existed, that I didn't deserve anything closer." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. A gesture so gentle it almost didn't belong to the same man who had shielded her from gunfire with his own body. "I don't want distance anymore." "Good," Naomi said, "because I plan on being extremely close, inconveniently close, the kind of close where you can't make a single decision without me having an opinion about it." "I wouldn't expect anything less." She laughed. A real laugh. Not broken, not raw, not the hollow sound that had escaped her in that room above Gangnam when a stranger had proposed marriage like it was a business merger. A laugh that came from somewhere deep and warm and healed. He kissed her, in front of the painting, in front of the crowd, in front of the cameras and the journalists and the curious strangers who would write about this moment in tomorrow's papers. And for the first time, neither of them was performing. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. The city glittered beneath clouds that were beginning to thin, patches of dark sky visible between them. Seoul breathed its eternal breath, restless, indifferent, beautiful in the way that only cities built on contradictions can be beautiful. Inside the gallery called Belonging, Two people stood beneath a painting of a woman walking out of a fire and held each other like they'd earned it. Because they had.